Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zhenya, and today we're going to be talking about all of the books that I read in January. So before we actually get into the reviews of the books, I did want to talk about something that I'm doing this year that's a little bit new. I decided to switch up how I rate my books, or at least be a little more intentional with them. So I went to my trusty Excel and I decided to do a boring looking spreadsheet. Basically what I do now is when I finish a book, I think about my initial rating, but then I want to go a little bit more in depth with it to make sure that I'm thinking about all the areas that are really important to me when reading and taking those into consideration as well. After I do my initial rating, I'm also judging it based off of the plot, the writing, the characters, the pacing, the structure, and then also my overall enjoyment. And then after that, I'm just going and taking an average of all of those, and whatever that average ends up being, also taking into account my initial rating, that ends up being my final rating. This month it actually turned out really well. It seems like a lot of my initial ratings are very close to what the final rating ends up being, but I've been enjoying picking apart the books a little bit more and just making sure the rating sits really well with me. And then another thing I wanted to mention is I still don't rate any of the nonfiction books that I read. I don't have a good reason why, I just am not really ready to start doing that yet. So with that being said, let's get into the books that I read in January. The first book that I read was a great way to start the year off. It was Hood Feminism. I think it's called Notes from the Women That a Movement Forgot. I don't have the physical copy with me right now, but I will put it on the screen. This book is by Mikki Kendall, and it really focuses on how mainstream feminism doesn't really focus on the basic needs, and those basic needs being a feminist issue. She's basically arguing that access to food and access to good housing, making a good wage, and being able to just live comfortably are all feminist issues. And she's also arguing that this tends to get forgotten, especially nowadays. Seems like throughout the book she's really arguing that mainstream feminism is really focusing on a select few. The book is really kind of talking directly to white women in a way. She's also saying that this select few are often forgetting to take into account that things like race and class, sexual orientation, and also ability are all intersections of feminism. So like I said, this was a really great way to start the year. It's always something that honestly I forget to think about, and I know that I'm privileged to be able to forget about things like this. The book itself was very straightforward and to the point. There was no sugarcoating at all. And like I said, it really did target white women, but I think that if you get offended by this, then you really do need to check your privilege, and there's kind of a problem there. I think that anyone can read this book, and I highly encourage you to. I don't read a lot of books surrounding feminism, so I don't know how it compares to others, but I do think it's a great way to start dipping your toes into literature in this area, and I'm really glad that I am finally getting back into reading nonfiction again, and I feel like reading long form content instead of a lot of the short form content that you see on media nowadays is very important. So like I said, I don't rate my nonfiction books, but yes, this one was really good and I highly recommend it. I also want to say that with all of the DEI rollbacks that are going around right now, this book does really go well with the timing of everything, at least going on in America. So if you are keeping up with that sort of thing, I definitely encourage you to pick up this book. I think that education is the backbone of how we really start pushback about these issues. Okay, that was kind of a heavy topic to start off the video. I'm sorry. The next book is also kind of heavy. The next book that I read is Beartown. I also don't have the physical copy of this one because I got it from the library, but this book is by Frederick Bachman. This book is about a small community who is nestled very deep in the woods, and for generation upon generation, hockey has really been the backbone of the community and what keeps them going. They are really fueled by ice hockey and the rink, and now their town is starting to go under a little bit, and they are really relying on the success of the junior ice hockey team to get them to continue to grow as a community. In the book, something very tragic happens and a conflict occurs, and this really starts to set the pace of the rest of the book, and you see how this tragedy impacts every single person in the community. It doesn't leave anyone untouched. I feel like the story that unfolds here is so powerful, profound, and necessary, and also the writing is very unique. I've never read a book that is written this way. This is my first Frederick Bachman book, and he really writes as if he wants it to be kind of like a TV show or a movie. Like you feel like you're very immersed and you're able to picture it so well, but it also feels like it would be a really good screenplay, or it's like meant for the screen, if that makes sense. At least that's how I kind of took the writing. I will say that the buildup was a little bit slow, but by the 40% mark, I was extremely hooked. I was fully immersed in the story, and I was really connected to so many of the characters in Beartown, and I really applaud Frederick Bachman for being able to do that. I feel like he really captures the sense of community, and you know everyone so well. It feels very real, but there's also so many metaphors that are really necessary, and I feel like a lot of passages really hit home to me. I love Beartown. I ended up rating this book 4.5 stars. I love it, and I can't wait to continue the series. Okay, the next book is also a little bit heavy, and I mean literally a little bit heavy. I finally finished War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This was quite the journey. I felt like I was super determined to get it all read in December, and I was trying to push through, but I only ended up making it maybe about this far in December, so I ended up finishing the rest of it in January, and I am glad that I decided to take a little bit of a step back in December and not finish it. I still was reading it, but I wanted to slow down a little bit, especially towards the end. I just wanted to savor it, and I really honestly did not want the story to be over. So this is a classic. You may have heard of it. The book broadly focuses on Napoleon's invasion in Russia in 1812. In the book, Tolstoy is really focusing amazingly on a very large cast of characters, and he really takes the time to go super in depth with everyone. He leaves no lives untouched. He talks about nobility, he talks about peasants, he talks about the regular people on the streets, and he also talks about soldiers. He is showing all these people as they go through their own individual struggles, and how this time and the war is really affecting them, but also how they are affecting the war and how history is being shaped. A big argument throughout the book that Tolstoy makes is that individual lives are setting history as we know it today, and it's not exactly the people who were in the war itself, but it's all the individual lives. Oh my gosh, this book was such a journey, guys. I have absolutely no regrets after spending over a month with it, 1,200 pages. It was just a journey, and I'm really, really glad that I read this book. Like I said, Tolstoy is really arguing against the idea that powerful leaders are shaping history, but it's really the individual actions that shape it. He's saying that big events come from small decisions, and I agree with this. He often discusses how free will and fate work together. He is really claiming that free will is what leads history, while fate is what follows the free will, if that makes sense. And Tolstoy does have a very strong sense of religion, so he's often arguing that God is also intermingled and following the two. While this book is a fiction, it is very historically accurate, and it goes very in depth with a lot of the war scenes, which was a little bit of a struggle for me. It's not something that I absolutely love to read, but it was necessary, and I was always looking forward to the kind of aftermath of what happened in those scenes, and then always I was a fan of more of the individual lives and those stories. Yes, Tolstoy's argument is very apparent in this book, and boy does he repeat it a lot. He goes on and on about the same thing, I will say, and this is a large book, so it does get repetitive, but it's important. The only reason I didn't give this a full 5 stars is just, it's not an absolute favorite of mine. It was extraordinary, but it didn't fully have that 5-star feeling, and I also felt like there was an epilogue, and it was just, There were 2 parts to the epilogue, and the second part was just so unnecessary. It was just saying what the book was saying the entire time, and it was really long, and it made me a little bit unsatisfied with the ending, to be honest. So that's another reason I didn't give it a full 5 stars, but yeah, this book was a 4.75 stars. If you are willing to go on a journey and this book sounds intriguing to you, I would highly recommend picking it up. The writing is outstanding. So that's War and Peace. Okay, after reading Beartown and War and Peace, my brain really needed a bit of a break. So the next book that I read is kind of apparent that I needed a break. I picked up a Frida McFadden book. I picked up The Coworker. This is a book that I also own physically, but I ended up giving it to my dad, so I don't have it with me here now. This book follows Dawn Schiff, who people think is a little bit weird. She has her quirks. It's apparent through her very strong love of turtles, her little tiny quirks that kind of get on people's nerves, and also the fact that she shows up to work on time at the exact same time every single day. So one day when she doesn't show up, her coworker, Natalie Farrell, finds that a little bit suspicious, and she decides to kind of figure out what happened to Dawn. She ends up getting an anonymous call that kind of freaks her out, and then the story begins to unfold, and it's really a cat and mouse chase of what the mystery is. And I don't really know how to go more in depth about what the story is about without spoiling anything. It's a mystery thriller, so I don't want to risk giving away too much of the plot. I will say that I had a really good time reading this book. I thought it was very fun, and I thought that the pacing of the book was immaculate. I was turning the pages so quickly trying to figure out what happened, and I honestly ended up reading the book kind of in one sitting, which I love when I can do that with a book. I will say that the plot was very familiar to me. It did feel like a copy and paste of one of my favorite mysteries, which was kind of disappointing, but also at the same time it was comforting because it's something that I really enjoy reading. And even though it did feel like a copy and paste, it was still fun to see how the book unraveled. I will say that the main character of Dawn, was a very interesting addition to the story, but I felt, I don't know, a little bit unsettled about how her character was portrayed, and it kind of felt like it was leaning into some stereotypes that I won't really mention, but it just made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, and I'm not sure if that's something that the author was going for or if it was just me, but I was able to set it aside and enjoy the book, but I just wanted to mention that. Yes, the book was fun, I enjoyed it, and I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is Dark Rivers of the Heart by Dean Koontz. Not a book that I would have typically picked up, but my dad gave it to me, so I felt like I owed it to him to finally read it. And I am really focusing on getting through the books that I own that I haven't read this year. If you're new here, it's something I can't seem to stop talking about, so sorry if that's annoying. This book follows Spencer Grant. He is drawn to a bar. He doesn't really know why. And then the aftermath of that is he ends up finding himself in someone else's house, and then the SWAT team comes, and it's just a big adventure chase, honestly. He finds himself obsessed with a woman that he doesn't even know. And then there's also a character who's following him on the chase, who considers himself kind of like, what is the word? An angel of death. And then also Spencer, the main character, is being haunted by a past that he can't remember. So really in this book you have so many random plots coming together to form a story, which is kind of fun. I honestly kind of have mixed feelings about this book. It felt way longer than it needed to be, and I was pretty bored in the middle part of it. The beginning was a fun build-up, and then ultimately I did continue reading the book because I was very interested to see what happened. It had a pretty strong mystery element to it. I also continued reading this book because I was pleasantly surprised at the writing that Dean Koontz put in here. I don't know why I didn't expect it to be good writing, but the story flowed really well, and I think that he has a good sentence structure, so I appreciated that. I really didn't connect with the characters in this book well, and something about the way that Dean Koontz, like how he writes his women, it really does not sit well with me. There was a dog in the book, and that bumped it up a star for me. I really enjoyed the dog. And yeah, I don't have anything else to say about this one. It was 3 stars. It was a good book. I I don't know if I'd recommend it, but it was 3 stars, if that makes sense. Like, if you really like Dean Koontz or the plot that I just described somehow sounds interesting to you, go ahead and pick it up. Otherwise, you could probably pass on it, but it's not bad. It's fine. Yes, that's Dark Rivers of the Heart. Okay, I feel like I am taking so long to talk about these books. I'm gonna try and speed it up a little bit. The next book that I read is Holes by Louis Sakar. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce this author's name, but this is a book that you may have read when you were younger. I believe that it's a children's classic, and this was my first time reading it. So this book follows Stanley Yelnats, and he ends up finding himself at a juvenile detention center. This juvenile detention center is actually a camp, and it's just for boys. It's called Camp Green Lake, but there's actually no lake to be found, and he finds himself digging holes that are exactly 5 feet deep by 5 feet wide. And the characters in this book, all these little boys, just end up digging holes every day, going on and on. And that's how the book starts, but it ends up having a little bit of a side story to it that gets the book another depth that I found very interesting. It also doesn't take long for Stanley to realize that it's not just digging holes for character development like the camp says. The camp leaders, I guess, they actually really are looking for something in these holes that the boys are digging, and they have to report anything that they find to the camp directors. I think that kind of describes the plot of this book really well if you didn't already know it. But the reason I picked this book up is because I was sitting in a room with my friends one day. We were all talking about our childhood classics that we loved, and I was on board with everything that everyone was saying, but then they brought up Holes, and everyone was raving about it. They were talking about how much they loved the book, how much they loved the movie, and I felt a little bit left out because I had never heard of this book. I never read it. So I kind of always had that in the back of my mind, and then I was driving by a little free library one day. This book was in it, and I decided to pick it up and read it. I will say that I really, really liked this book. I flew through it. I read it in one sitting. I had a great time, and I can definitely see why children used to love this back in the day. I definitely would have loved it as a child. I didn't end up rating it because I didn't know exactly how to rate a book that is kind of meant for a younger audience, that's a classic to so many people, but I did really enjoy it. I'd recommend it if you haven't read it. I haven't watched the movie yet, but I am looking forward to it. So yes, I'm really glad that I finally know the story and I know the lore that everyone is always talking about. Well, not always, but if I hear them talking about it again, now I'll know. And that's Holes. The next book that I read is Persuasion by Jane Austen. Oh, I love how cute this copy is. I believe that this is the last book that Jane Austen wrote. This book follows Anne Elliot, who years ago was in love with Frederick Wentworth, and she ends up rejecting his love because of her family and his rank. And then 8 years later, Wentworth returns. He is wealthy, he's a captain, and Anne still hasn't found a love. So we're really following her feelings re-emerging for Wentworth, and if you can't tell based off the little plot that I just described, it is kind of a second chance romance. Well, yeah, it is a second chance romance. What am I talking about? That's exactly what it is. The whole book is Anne kind of rethinking her past choices, why she did it, trying to overcome it, and ultimately win back Captain Wentworth. I really loved the slow burn of this book. It wasn't a super thick book, which I also enjoyed. The story felt like just the right length. It was a pretty quick read, and I am glad to have checked it off my list. It's not my favorite book by Jane Austen, but I really enjoyed it. And I'm finding that as I age, I'm starting to love Jane Austen books more and more with every book that I read, and I feel like I'm able to relate to them a little bit more with more maturity in my own personal life, I guess, if that makes sense. But yes, I really liked Persuasion by Jane Austen, and I would highly recommend it. I ended up rating it 4.25 stars. The next book that I read, I don't have the physical copy of it. I also got this one from the library, but it is A Crane Among Wolves by June Her. I read this for a book club that I'm in. This book took place in 1506 in Joseon, Korea, in that dynasty. Sorry if my pronunciations suck. I didn't look up how to pronounce these names before doing this video, my bad. but it's following King Yonsian and his tyranny and his reign of terror on Korea. And he is really leaving this community powerless and helpless. So the book follows 17-year-old Isyul, and her sister was taken by the king, and she goes on the journey to find her sister. She risks everything to save her sister. The other point of view in the story is Prince Daeyoung, and he is the half-brother of the tyrant king. He is kind of working to overthrow and make this plot to overthrow the tyranny, while also being the right-hand man of the king. So I don't know, those are the two points of views that you're following. I don't know if I described that very well. But yes, eventually the paths of Isyul and Daeyoung cross. They end up embarking on a plan to end the tyranny of the king and overthrow, and that's what the book kind of follows. Going into this book, I didn't really know that it was aiming to be historically accurate, and I didn't know anything about this time, but I found that point of it very interesting. That was the main reason that I enjoyed the book and was continuously drawn into it. And because of that, the overall plot line of the book was intriguing, and I really liked the setting of it. The story had a really fast build-up, and I was very into it in the beginning, but then throughout the middle, the book kind of started to drag for me, and I found it to be a little bit of a bore. I also kind of wish that the subplot of the romance was just left out completely. I really wasn't rooting for Isyul and Daeyoung to get together. I just wish that she would have continued searching for her sister and him trying to overthrow the king. And yes, I didn't really feel any chemistry between the characters, so that wasn't something that I really loved about the story. I felt much more drawn to the historical aspects of the book, which in my opinion were the strongest part of the story. I also really didn't like how the story switched between first and third person when you were switching point of views. This is definitely just a personal opinion. I think that there was probably a reason for it, and I think a lot of people would probably enjoy that, but it just kind of felt like I was getting drawn in and out of the story too much, so that didn't really work for me. So this book didn't really become a favorite of mine, but it was overall an enjoyable read, and I ended up rating it 3.5 stars. The next book that I read is God Is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything. This is by Christopher Hitchens, and it is really a book that is critiquing religion and talking about, like the title says, how it poisons everything, and the argument is basically that humanity would be better off without religion. Hitchens is really arguing that religion is a sense of division and anger and violence in community. Throughout the book, he's examining the history of religion and then also the modern impacts of society having religious beliefs. And honestly, throughout the book, he's really challenging the morality of people who follow religions and kind of calling for people to have more of a scientific inquiry and approach to things. The main argument of this book is that he is saying that humanity would be better off without religion. This book really airs on a huge topic, and I do not want to be ripped apart on the internet just yet for stating what I believe or don't believe in this book. However, I do want to encourage you to pick up this book. I think that it's important that people form their own opinion on this topic. I won't go into details, but do I want to say this? Yes, I will say it. I have my own religious or spiritual beliefs, and I feel like this was a bit of a tougher read for me, but it was also really necessary at the same time. I really think that you don't need to believe in atheism to read this book or be an atheist. I think that Hitchens offers some serious insight, and it feels a little bit necessary, especially given the relevant times that we're in. And if you are paying close enough attention to the state of our world, you may be aware that this sort of thing is very prevalent right now. So yes, I hope that I don't get ripped apart for talking about this book. I'm not saying like what I agree or don't agree with, but I am saying that it's important to be able to read books from something that you may not necessarily usually pick up, to kind of broaden your viewpoints on life and get a sense of the different sides that people think. And I found a lot of benefit by really looking into sides that kind of tend to oppose, or I Okay, I'm done. I'm not talking about this book anymore. I'm just gonna end up going on a rant that you guys do not care about. You don't need to hear, but I can talk about so many things right now. So much is in my brain. Okay, I'm done. That was God is Not Great. No rating. It was nonfiction. Those are my thoughts. Okay, we are finally at the last book, guys. Thank you so much for sticking it out to this point. But this is Homeseeking by Carissa Chen. This book follows separated lovers through 6 long decades of Chinese history, and we are going through war and famine and opportunity and how their lives were separated. You're going through Hong Kong and Taiwan. You go through the streets of New York and Los Angeles. In this book, you're following Haiwan and Suchi. I loved that the book is told from 2 points of view that are, one is going backwards in time and the other is going forwards in time, and then you end up meeting in the middle. And then also in this book, Haiwan, he really holds his memories close. And Suchi, she tries to push her memories away, and you're really seeing how that unfolds in the book. I felt that this was such a gorgeous read. The storytelling was beautiful. I loved that the approach the author decided to take worked so well with this book. I really loved the dual ascending and descending timelines. I think that was perfect, and it made so much sense for the story that the author was trying to convey. This is a debut novel, I believe, and I really applaud the author. I feel like she did an amazing job. I would 100% read other books by this author as she continues to release them, and overall, I am very glad that I read Homeseeking. Guys, we made it to the end of this video. I'm so sorry if I rambled on and on. I had a really good reading month. I had a lot to say about all of the books that I read in January. Towards my reading goal, I ended up reading 10 books out of the 60 books that I want to read this year. I also made the goal of wanting to read 12 classics and 12 nonfiction. I ended up reading 2 classics and 2 nonfiction this month, so that is great. And then I also had the goal of wanting to decrease my physical TBR, the books that I own that I haven't read, and I ended up reading 8 books from my physical TBR, and 2 books that I read were from the library, so that's great. As always, thank you guys so much for watching my videos. I really have loved seeing my audience grow and forming a bit of a community. I love when you guys leave comments and we get to talk. That really, really makes me happy. So if you have any books that you think I would enjoy, or recommendations, or really if you just want to say anything, feel free to leave a comment below, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye!